On the outskirts of a rural town, nestled in the tranquility of nature, stood a modest home. The house seemed to blend into the trees that danced with the wind, becoming one with the landscape. In the yard, beyond a wooden fence, fruit trees stretched out, coming to life with the occasional chirping of birds. A young woman lived alone in this house. Jessica. In her late 20s, she had chosen to leave city life behind, living a simple and quiet existence. She carried pain from her past, memories that left their mark, but she shared them with no one. Only one being broke her silence, her dog, Rex. Rex, a German shepherd, was a majestic presence with soft, understanding eyes. Jessica had found him as a tiny puppy, abandoned on the street, and had raised him herself. Over time, an unbreakable bond had formed between them. So much so that sometimes, even without words, Rex could sense what Jessica was feeling. They watched the stars together at night and took walks every morning. Silence had become their shared language. One summer morning, as the sun gently touched the garden, Jessica stepped outside to carry out one of her old habits. She approached the cherry tree in her yard. Its branches were heavy with ripe fruit. "We'll make jam today, right, Rex?" she murmured. Rex sat in the shade, watching her intently. As always, Jessica dragged a small metal ladder beneath the tree. Smiling, she stepped onto the first rung and picked a couple of cherries. But when the ripest ones hung just a bit too high, she reached up to grab them, shifting her balance. Then came the sound. A crack. The slick metal slipped beneath her. Jessica's foot lost grip, and she fell hard to the ground. The earth was unforgiving. When her body hit, she gasped sharply. For a moment, it felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. Rex immediately barked and rushed to her side. Jessica lay curled on the ground, clutching her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to take a deep breath. "Ah, I think it's just my ribs," she said between ragged breaths. "I'm okay, Rex. I'm okay." Rex pressed his face against her neck, visibly worried. Jessica slowly stood up, believing the pain was just temporary. "Maybe it'll bruise, but it's nothing," she said, making her way back into the house. What she didn't know was that the fall had caused a serious injury to her left lung. From that day on, Jessica began waking up feeling tired on certain mornings. Sometimes she had to pause just to catch her breath. But being someone who had learned to fight through pain, she never let anyone see her weakness. She didn't like to show vulnerability. She assumed it would pass. But for Rex, nothing had passed. To him, the change in his owner was clear as day. Her chest rose and fell faster in her sleep, and some nights she would wake up suddenly, coughing hard. Rex curls up beside Jessica's bed, never taking his eyes off her for a second. Whenever they go outside, he shows his unease. He notices her slow steps, the deep breaths she takes. Some days when Jessica sits down on the ground, Rex stands behind her, as if waiting to protect her. Other times he nudges her hand with his paw and looks into her eyes. Jessica sometimes laughs. "Oh, Rex, have you become my bodyguard? What's gotten into you?" But in Rex's eyes there is seriousness. His silent cries have yet to be heard. Guy Lishmi. Although Jessica's simple life in the countryside seemed peaceful from the outside, it was filled with suppressed memories. Her decision to live alone was not a choice made overnight. Her childhood in the city was filled with years of being suffocated by a lack of love, despite being surrounded by crowds. Her mother was a nurse who worked long hours, and her father was a cold and authoritarian man. When he came home, he couldn't tolerate the slightest noise. Whenever Jessica tried to excitedly tell him something, her father would shut her down with, "Enough already! Stop giving me a headache!" During those years, Jessica's refuge was a German shepherd puppy born in the apartment building's backyard. The neighbor's dog had given birth, but one of the puppies was a weak, neglected male. Jessica would secretly bring him food and talk to him for hours. She named him Rex. A bond formed between the lonely child and the lonely puppy so strong that, over time, they became each other's voice, joy, and trust. But one day her family decided to move. When Jessica was just 11 years old, she had to leave Rex behind. That day, Jessica's heart was broken for the first time. Years passed. She graduated from college and worked in the city for a short time. However, crowded offices, fake smiles, and the happy people posting on social media weren't for her. Deep down, she longed for the pure happiness of her childhood, the love she saw in a dog's eyes. That's why, when she turned 27, she completely left the city behind. She repaired her grandmother's old house on the edge of the town and moved there. Being alone with nature seemed like the only way to silence her past. It was during that time, one Sunday morning, when she went to the town's market, a dog was running between the cars. People were avoiding it. No one wanted to adopt it. Jessica stopped right then. Her heart started to race. When she looked into the dog's eyes, she saw the eyes of the little Rex she had left behind years ago. Of course, it couldn't be the same dog, but the same spirit, the same depth. This was her new friend, also named Rex. That day, Jessica made her decision. She adopted Rex. She saw him as a rebirth of her own past, and together they built a new life. 3 years passed. As the days went by calmly and peacefully, Jessica began waking up some mornings with a deep pain in her chest. She couldn't catch her breath, and during walks, she became tired more quickly. But she had learned to be strong. "It'll pass," she would say. "Everyone has their tired days." But Rex thought differently. Rex began acting more restless with each passing day. When Jessica went to bed, he would stand vigilantly by her bedside, listening carefully to her breathing, sometimes even touching her chest with his paw. Jessica thought these actions were just sweet displays of affection, but there was anxiety in Rex's eyes. When they went outside, he would constantly tug her towards the town's health clinic. Jessica couldn't make sense of this behavior, and sometimes she would call him back saying, "Rex, what are you doing?" Until that night. In the middle of the night, Jessica suddenly found herself struggling for breath in her sleep. A sharp pain pierced her chest, spreading through her entire body. When she woke up, she tried to stand up in a panic but couldn't breathe. It felt like something was lodged in her throat. Holding her chest with her hands, she collapsed to the floor. Without a moment's hesitation, Rex began barking, so loudly, so sharply. He had never barked like this before. He leapt through the window, scratched at the door with his paws, and ran towards the town. The silence of that night was shattered by Rex's cries. Jessica, with a brief struggle, opened her eyes, but her breath was trapped, as if an invisible rock was pressing down on her chest. Wheezing, suffocating breaths. Her eyes frantically searched for Rex. In that moment, she just wanted to see him, her best friend. Rex came to the edge of the bed and nudged Jessica's arm with his paw, then ran to the door and returned. Jessica whispered with difficulty, "Don't go. Stay." But Rex had already learned that she was too stubborn to ask for help. This was no longer just Jessica's battle, it was his too. Jessica had left behind many things in her youth. The roads outside the town had always been an escape for her. She had grown up in a broken home. When Jessica was 12, her father had started a new life in another city, and her mother, struggling with depression, had become oblivious to her. Jessica had learned to grow up on her own, and the only place she had ever found trust and love was in one being, Rex. Rex entered her life when he was just a puppy, during Jessica's first year of high school. She had found him abandoned in a dumpster on her way to school, his tiny, trembling body immediately scooped into her arms. From that day on, whenever Jessica felt lonely, Rex was by her side. He became a loyal companion who greeted her with love when she returned home from school, walked with her under the moonlight at night, and rested his head on her lap during stressful exams. A friend with whom she shared everything. Jessica never went to the big city. She even completed her university degree through distance learning, because Rex's eyes built a world for her. No one else's eyes had ever looked at her that deeply. Instead of trusting people, she preferred to silently communicate with a German shepherd. Jessica had shaped her life with her own hands, built her own fences, and decorated her garden with flowers she had planted herself. But that day, when she fell from the ladder, that was the first time she had ever felt vulnerable. She initially didn't pay much attention to the pain in her chest, but Rex wouldn't let her ignore it. Even in those early days when Jessica walked, he would carefully listen to her breathing, sometimes making strange sounds beside her, sometimes not wanting her to go outside. Jessica couldn't make sense of it. She just thought he was being overly protective, but Rex had already sensed that something was wrong. Over time, Jessica started coughing more often. She would wake up in the middle of the night, startled, and wake up feeling exhausted in the mornings. Rex, however, would sit at the edge of her bed every morning, waiting as if checking her breath before waking her up. One night, Jessica struggled again in her sleep. When she opened her eyes, she saw Rex at her bedside. He was holding her scarf in his mouth. It was the old scarf she had kept since her childhood, the one she had inherited from her mother. Rex had brought her most treasured possession. In that moment, Jessica understood. Rex was trying to tell her something. The scarf was a symbol for her. It was perhaps the only memory she had left of her mother. When she was a child and had a bad dream, her mother would tie the scarf around her neck and say, "This will protect you." Even years later, Jessica had kept the scarf in her drawer, rarely taking it out. But now, seeing it in Rex's mouth, something inside her shifted. With trembling hands, Jessica took the scarf. She wanted to take a deep breath, but her lungs wouldn't allow it. The pressure on her chest grew, intensifying from within. When she could no longer breathe, Rex immediately pressed against her side. He placed his nose in her palm. His eyes. In those eyes, there were words. There was panic. There was love. In that moment, scenes from Jessica's past began to rush through her mind like a film reel. She remembered the day Rex, when he was just a puppy, hid under the blanket with her. The first time she had been left alone, crying, and how he came to rest his head on her knees. And one night, during her youth, when she sat in the garden heartbroken, how he had laid his head on her shoulder for hours. Rex was not just a dog, he was a witness to her life. And now, Jessica had to make a decision. For years, she had ignored herself. She had made it a habit to say, "I'm fine." But now she had to be strong, not just for herself, but for Rex too, because she couldn't disregard this loyalty. She tried to sit up from her bed. Her chest burned, but in that moment, she only looked at Rex. "We have to go. I think I need help," she said in a quiet voice. But in that moment, Jessica lost consciousness. Her head fell back onto the pillow, and Rex panicked. A brief moment of silence. Then a loud, long howl rose into the night's darkness. Jessica was in pain, and Rex could no longer wait. He rubbed his head against Jessica's hands one last time. Then he rushed toward the door. The sound of his claws scraping the doorframe echoed off the walls. That house no longer belonged to Rex. It was about Jessica's life now. He bolted outside, the rain drizzling down, but he didn't stop. He ran through the mud, over the rocky paths, heading toward the center of the town. There was only one thought in his heart. "I won't leave her alone." As Rex stepped through the muddy roads, the raindrops soaked his face and his feet slipped on the slick ground. But he didn't stop. For years, he had been Jessica's breath, her voice, her shadow. Now Jessica's breath had become shallow, her voice hoarse, her shadow faded. If he didn't act now, it could all be over. The town center was several kilometers away. Walking that distance would have been difficult enough, but running through the storm at night was madness. But for Rex, only one thing was real: Jessica's life. He first headed toward the farm at the edge of town. The lights were still on. Without even making eye contact with the dog in the yard, he jumped over the fence. He scratched at the door and barked. The dog inside started barking too, but the owner didn't wake up. Rex barked louder, scratched harder. But when no answer came, he couldn't waste any more time. He left that place. After a while, he noticed light spilling from the small gas station in the center of town. He ran, scratched, but the man inside was wearing headphones and couldn't hear anything. Rex's chest was heaving, and he was breathless, but he still wasn't giving up. Just like Jessica, whenever she fell, she would get back up. Now it was Rex's turn to rise for her. On his third attempt, Rex arrived at the house of the elderly man who was the town's veterinarian. There were no lights. Rex barked once more, again and again. Then, he lay down in front of the wooden door. He pressed his ears against the door, beginning to whine softly. It was as if he was crying. That sigh, it was like a lament piercing the night. A window cracked open inside. The elderly man, wrapped in a blanket, looked out. "Rex," he said in surprise, "what are you doing here at this hour?" But as soon as Rex saw him, he immediately stood up, turned, took a step, then looked back. He was trying to show that they had to go. With his eyes, with his posture, he was almost begging. The elderly man noticed something was wrong. He quickly grabbed his jacket and took his keys. "All right, son, show me. Where are we going?" Rex began to run. This time there was hope by his side. They were racing against time. The rain had intensified, falling from the sky like a morning that grew stronger. The wind was blowing so hard that it could break tree branches, and the dirt road was turning into mud. Even when Rex got into the elderly man's van, he didn't take his eyes off the road, whimpering. They were racing against time. The elderly veterinarian took the wheel. "All right, Rex, hang on, son. We'll get you to Jessica." As the van left the outskirts of the town, the headlights were obscured by the rain's intensity. The wind was making the wipers struggle. Moving forward on the muddy road was becoming more impossible with every passing minute. Rex's nose was pressed against the glass. Jessica's house was just beyond that forest. Suddenly, the road narrowed, and with the jolt of a wheel sinking into a deep rut, the van swerved to the right. The engine made a noise. Then it didn't start again. The elderly man slammed his hand on the steering wheel. Damn it! This was the last thing we needed in this weather. But Rex wasn't waiting. He pressed his paw against the door and barked. He understood. They couldn't afford to waste any time. They couldn't sit in the car and wait for help. Jessica's breath needed him. The elderly man sighed. All right, Rex. Let's go. Show me the way." He took out his flashlight and put his hood on. Rex immediately darted forward, slogging through the mud. Sometimes he stopped, turned back to make sure the old man was following, and once he saw he was, he sped up again. The rain was no longer just rain. It felt like the sky was crying with a sob. With every step, Rex could feel Jessica's breath getting more labored. There was only one thought in his heart: I have to make it. As they passed through the forest, a lightning bolt suddenly struck nearby. The elderly man flinched and stumbled in place. "Rex, in this storm, we'll lose our way." But Rex wasn't losing track. Jessica's scent, the memory of her voice, that bond was guiding him. His mind worked like a compass. Without stopping, without hesitation, he pressed on. Minutes later, Jessica's house appeared in the distance. There were no lights. Amid the sound of rain rising like a sob in the silence, Rex gathered his last strength and dashed toward the door. He scratched the door with his paw, barked, howled, and then collapsed to the ground. The elderly man came running. "Jessica! Jessica!" The door was ajar. When they rushed inside, Jessica had collapsed on the floor. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing uneven. Rex immediately went to her bedside, placed his head on her chest, and didn't move. His eyes were filled with tears. The old man quickly grabbed his phone and called for emergency help. "A woman! Her breathing is very weak. Send an ambulance, please hurry!" he shouted, his hands trembling as he gripped the phone. The only response he heard was the calm voice of the operator. "An ambulance has been dispatched. However, the storm is limiting access to the roads. It may take us some time to reach you. Please do not move her." Would it take time? Would Jessica have enough time? The old man glanced at Rex. He hadn't moved an inch from Jessica's side. His head was resting on her chest as if he was following her breaths. Tears streamed down his face, blending with his fur. In his silence, it was as if he was shouting. Jessica's hands were icy. Her face was pale, but she was still there. There was still a breath. The old man took off his coat and draped it over Jessica. "Hang in there, sweetheart. Help is on the way. Just hold on." Rex suddenly lifted his head. He carefully looked at Jessica's face. With a rasping breath, he sighed, then laid his head back down. Even in this silent wait, it was as if he was encouraging her, saying, "Don't give up." Minutes felt like hours. Each second stretched on, heavy with tension. The rain hammered against the windows like fists. The sky was filled with lightning, as if in the middle of a battle. In that moment, Jessica stirred slightly. Her eyelids slowly fluttered open. Her eyes were blurry, but they met a familiar pair of eyes. Rex's eyes. The bond between them spoke without words. In a whisper, she murmured, "Rex, did you come?" The old man was nearly in tears from joy. "Jessica, don't move! The ambulance is on its way!" Jessica closed her eyes again, But this time her consciousness hadn't fully faded. Silence returned. Silence, but not despair. Rex was there, and where he was, hope always remained. Minutes passed. The old man murmured prayers beside Jessica, but Rex stood up once again. He had sensed something. He stepped outside, his ears perked. In the distance far away, he heard the faint sound of a siren. Yes, they were coming, but this brought up a new problem. The end of the road was blocked by the forest path, and it was nearly impossible for the ambulance to reach them. Rex ran back to the old man, scratched at the door. Then he barked towards the forest. "What now, Rex?" "It's too dangerous out there." But Rex didn't just bark. He leaped forward. His target was clear, to clear the path for the ambulance. Maybe to draw their attention. The old man didn't fully understand what was happening, but instinctively he followed Rex. The sound of the siren coming from the forest was now clearer. Rex continued through the muddy path, howling as he went. Finally, through the heart of the storm, a beam of light flashed. It was the ambulance headlights. The driver and medical team had been forced to stop when they realized they couldn't go any further on the road. But Rex had sensed their presence. He barked and howled as he ran toward them. Finally, one of the paramedics noticed, "Hey, there's a dog over there." The other one grabbed a flashlight. "He might be guiding us." "Let's go see." Rex moved a few meters ahead, stopped, looked back, then continued on. The men quickly followed him. They made their way, half walking, half running. Under the pouring rain, the only guide through the dark forest was Rex, and he seemed as if he had been doing this job for years, as determined as ever. When they finally arrived at the house, Jessica was still on the floor, but she was breathing. The paramedics quickly began their intervention. Her pulse was checked, oxygen was administered, and her blood pressure was measured. "Weak, but still with us. We're taking her to the stretcher now." The old man covered his face with his hands. He silently thanked God. Rex, however, didn't take a step back. As Jessica was carried on the stretcher, he leaned his head against her hand, offering her comfort. And when Jessica opened her eyes once more, it felt like that familiar voice whispered in her ear. Maybe it was a dream, maybe it was real. "You saved my life, Rex." As Jessica was carried to the ambulance on the stretcher, Rex immediately ran after them. But one of the paramedics stopped him by stepping in front of him. "Hold on, is this dog yours?" he asked the old man. The man shook his head. "She's his owner." "Jessica," the paramedic furrowed his brow. "We can't take the dog in the ambulance. Especially with weather like this, the hygiene risk is too high. Get him inside, he can't stay out here." The old man bent down and gently patted Rex's head. "I understand, my friend, but you need to stay here. She's in good hands now." Rex turned his eyes toward the ambulance that had taken Jessica away. A hollow feeling stirred within him. Jessica was leaving, and he hadn't been able to go with her. The old man reluctantly pulled him inside. As he closed the door, Rex's eyes followed the direction the ambulance had gone, through the crack in the door. The ambulance drove away. The sound of the siren faded into the wind as Rex stood by the door for a while. Then he turned and looked at the house. Silence. Jessica's scent still lingered everywhere, but she was gone. Minutes passed, hours ticked by. Rex didn't move from the doorway. When the old man fell asleep, Rex silently slipped outside. His emotions were heavy, his instincts took over. He had to find Jessica. He had to be by her side. Rex lifted his head and sniffed the air. Then he placed his paws onto the muddy path and began following the direction Jessica had gone. The road was long and difficult. The rain had started again. Narrow trails through the forest, fallen trees and mud-covered paths. But Rex didn't give up. Jessica's scent was etched in his mind. However, as the storm grew stronger, the directions became confused. At the forks in the road, deciding which way to go became harder. For a while, Rex lost his way. Hungry, tired, and cold, he sheltered under a fence. His eyes, blurred by the rain, were fixed on the dark night. In the absence of Jessica, there was a weight in his heart, but this wasn't an end. It was just a stop. By morning, he would set off again. As the sun struggled to rise through the clouds, Rex was still walking. He was exhausted, but he wouldn't stop until he found Jessica. That same morning, in the small hospital in the city, Jessica opened her eyes. The white ceiling, the sterile air, and the beeping sounds of the monitors attached to her heart. For a brief moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then she saw the elderly man. He was smiling. "I'm so glad you're awake, my girl. You almost..." Jessica sat up slightly. "Rex? Where is he?" The old man's smile faded. They couldn't bring him into the ambulance. We thought he should stay at home. We were worried he might get hurt." Jessica's eyes widened. Her heart felt like it might leap from her chest. "You didn't leave him, did you? You didn't close the door?" The man lowered his head. "I think he might have sneaked out that night." Jessica's voice trembled. "He would never leave me. Rex, he would never leave me." In that moment, tears streamed down Jessica's cheeks. For the first time, she realized just how helpless she felt lying in that hospital bed. Yes, she was recovering, but a part of her heart was missing. Meanwhile, after a long journey, Rex finally reached the center of the town. The crowds of people, the unfamiliar sounds. Everything scared him, but when he caught the faint scent of Jessica, hope surged within him once more. A few passers-by looked at the tired, muddy dog with pity. Some offered him water, others called to him, but Rex paid no attention to them. He kept moving, reaching the hospital's emergency entrance. When the automatic doors opened, he tried to enter, but security stopped him. "Hey, what is this dog doing here?" Rex barked, his eyes searching for Jessica. But he was too late. Jessica had been discharged that morning. She was already on her way home. When Jessica arrived home, she opened the door slightly. "Rex!" she called out. Her voice echoed back to her, but no response came. She searched the entire house, combed through the grassy areas, checked the kitchen and the garden. He was nowhere to be found. Her heart tightened. Her throat tightened. She dropped to her knees. "Rex, where are you?" Rex was still outside the hospital, curled up on the ground. His eyes were closed, but his ears were alert. Jessica's voice. Would it come from somewhere? But that voice was already echoing inside the house, in the silence, with hope. Jessica stared out the windows, flinching at every car sound, her heart racing with every door creak. Days had passed. She couldn't sleep at night. The small blue bowl on the kitchen table was empty. In the food bowl next to it, no one had eaten from it. As the tears ran down her cheek, these words passed through her mind. "Where did you go, Rex? Why did you leave? Why weren't you there when I woke up?" At that moment, Rex was curled up on the cold ground in front of the hospital door. He hadn't moved from the same spot for 4 days. Every morning, when the hospital doors opened, he would stand up and listen carefully, trying to distinguish the scent of every woman who passed by. But Jessica wasn't coming. The hope inside him had been fed by patience. But now he was exhausted. His body trembled from hunger, and the rain-soaked fur made the cold feel even deeper. He was determined not to leave, but one morning, Jessica's scent was no longer coming from the building. He slowly lifted his nose and sniffed the air. That familiar scent was no longer there. Rex, with his instincts, knew. Jessica was gone, but where? He slowly stood up. His legs were shaking, but the determination in his heart remained firm. He had to find Jessica. Rex set off again. He left the hospital where he had waited for 4 days. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still gray. He walked through the mud-covered paths and along the edges of sidewalks. He caught the attention of people in town, but they couldn't get close. There was a determination in his eyes that belonged to another world, a world far away from everything, belonging to just one person. That afternoon, he arrived at the old man's door. He scratched at the door. When the man opened it and saw the bedraggled, soaked, exhausted dog in front of him, he was stunned. "My God, you're still alive," he said, quickly letting him inside. Rex stayed inside for a short while. He warmed up, but his eyes were always on the door, the hands pressing on his chest, the food placed in front of him. None of it mattered. He only wanted to know about Jessica. The old man looked into his eyes. "You're looking for her, aren't you, my friend?" Rex gently seemed to nod. Then he turned to the door and scratched at it lightly. The man sighed. "You want to leave? All right, but be careful." He opened the door. Without looking back, Rex set off on his journey. Jessica had searched every corner of the house, then scoured the entire town. She had posted Rex's photo on every wall and every pole. "Lost dog, name Rex. Please call if seen." Her phone was in her hand day and night, but no one called. She had sent photos to the town's veterinarians, shelters, even social media groups in neighboring cities. She walked the streets over and over again, sat in parks for hours, shouting his name until her voice gave out. But there wasn't a single trace. Every evening, she sat outside the door. It felt as though any moment he would tap on the door with his paws, bounding in with his joyful run. But he wasn't there. Jessica's eyes had reached the edge of losing hope. What if something happened to him? What if he got hit by a car? What if he fainted from hunger? Thoughts spun in her mind, tightening around her throat like a knot. But there was something she didn't know. Rex hadn't given up. Rex kept walking toward the area where Jessica's house was. However, the roads had changed. Paths closed by rain, small streams overflowing, all confused his sense of direction. Sometimes a child would pet his head, or an elderly woman would leave water for him, but he didn't pay attention to any of them. One morning in the early hours, he stopped under a street lamp. He lifted his nose, sniffed the air. That scent? Yes, it was so close, but the sky had darkened and the streets were deserted. Rex had wandered down another wrong alley. The sudden screeching of a car's brakes sent him scrambling behind a trash can. His heart pounded with fear, but he didn't give up. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he kept moving forward. At that moment, Jessica was making her last call, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Yes, did you see the flyers? Please, if anyone sees him, call," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, just give me a little hope." She hung up the phone and turned to the window. Her eyes drifted into the distance. "You never left me, Rex. How can I leave you now?" Jessica's voice cracked, her throat tightening. She placed her hands on her knees, bowed her head. Tears softly dripped onto the carpet. The silence in the house weighed heavily on her. Every corner was filled with Rex's memories. The fur on the edge of the couch, the toy ball in the living room, the paw prints by the door. Now there was no sound left. He whispered to himself, "He won't come back." For the first time, his heart felt a sharp emptiness. He wasn't afraid. It was hopelessness that tore him apart. Just then, a cat's meow echoed from outside the window. Jessica jumped up, pulling the curtain aside, but what came was only a faint shadow blending into the night. Hope shattered again. Her shoulders slumped. She no longer put up flyers. People were still asking, but they couldn't get an answer, because in Jessica's eyes there was nothing left but exhaustion. Meanwhile, Rex was so exhausted he could barely stand. He had curled up at the bottom of a trash can. His fur, soaked by the rain, had dried but had hardened with dirt. His stomach ached from hunger. Slowly, he opened his eyes. He watched a few sparrows fighting over a breadcrumb. Then he slowly got up. His trembling legs carried him forward. For days, he had been searching for the right path. At every turn, he searched for Jessica's scent, but he couldn't find it. He had spent a night behind a small grocery store, nibbling on dry breadcrumbs that an elderly lady had thrown away. But his stomach couldn't handle it. As his weakness grew, his steps slowed down. At night, he curled up next to a bench or against a wall. During the day, he walked on. But there was still one goal in his heart: to go home, to return to Jessica. One day, he reached a crossroads and stopped. He lifted his nose, sniffing the wind. A faint, very faint scent. Familiar. Hope suddenly sparked in his heart. With determination, he planted his paws firmly on the ground and quickened his pace. But after just a few steps, his body gave in. He collapsed onto his knees. His breathing was quick, irregular. His eyes seemed to be closing. But in his mind, there was only one thing: Jessica's smiling face. A child found him there. "Mom, there's a dog lying here. I think he's sick." But Rex didn't move. He opened his eyes one last time, with one final glimmer of hope. But Jessica wasn't there. That night, Jessica stayed up by the window. Her eyes were bloodshot. She gently caressed an old photograph in her hands. It was of her and Rex, taken in the park. There was pure love in their eyes, a silent understanding between them. He would never leave me, she thought. But then, without meaning to, the words came to her mind. Maybe he did leave. That thought shook her even more. Tears flowed again. She got up and walked to the kitchen. Automatically, she reached for the food bowl, then stopped. She put the bowl down, closed the lid. In that moment, for the first time, hope was fully replaced by a sense of farewell. The doorbell rang. Jessica's heart suddenly raced. Her eyes widened. She rushed to the door and opened it. But standing there was only her neighbor. "Any news?" Jessica shook her head from side to side. Her lips trembled. Her neighbor placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe a miracle will happen," she said softly. Jessica whispered the word that had been on her mind. "I hope so." But her belief was dwindling. Rex was still walking through the back streets, but now his sense of direction was blurred. Hunger, weakness, and the loneliness that had lasted for days had mentally drained him. Every now and then, he stopped, sniffing the air, but it was always in vain. He saw a small shack by the side of the road. He went inside. Realizing the shack was empty, he curled up on the floor. His body was shaking. He closed his eyes. Maybe for a few hours, or maybe forever. But then, something reached his nose. Far away, very far away, Jessica's scent, weak but real. Rex, despite all his pain, stood up once more. His eyes were filled with determination. His legs were shaking, but his will was unwavering. Because in his heart, one sentence still echoed, "I won't leave him alone." Rex stepped out of the shack, his eyes blurry, his body exhausted, but his heart strong. He had to reach Jessica. He didn't know the way, but his spirit was guiding him. It was as if the love inside him had become his compass. Just then, old veterinarian Isaac was sitting outside his shop, taking a sip of his morning coffee. He adjusted his glasses, looked up, and he saw him, a dog covered in dust and mud, walking along a cracked path. He recognized that gaze. He recognized that determination. "Rex!" He jumped to his feet, shouting, "Rex, my boy!" But Rex didn't even look back, continuing on his way. Isaac quickly ran into the shop and grabbed his phone. As Jessica sat absent-mindedly at home, the ringing phone startled her. It was Isaac, the vet. She answered immediately. "Jessica, honey, something just happened. I need to tell you." Jessica's heart started racing again. "What happened? Is it Rex?" Isaac's voice was excited. "He passed by the shop. I recognized him. He was weak, but he was walking. He didn't stop. It was like he was trying to get somewhere. Jessica, he's still looking for you." Tears began to stream down Jessica's face. A warmth spread through her heart once again. Rex was alive, and he still hadn't given up. She stood up quickly. "Isaac, which way did he go?" "Toward the west side of town, the old train tracks. But Jessica..." He looked exhausted. "He can't be too far." Jessica grabbed her coat and quickly shoved her keys into her pocket. She ran out the door, slamming the car door shut behind her. As she started the engine, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, trembling, but her eyes were filled with determination. "Hang in there, Rex. Please, hang in there." Rex had reached the forest on the west side. The ground was wet, and in some places, he was sinking into the mud. He stopped every few steps, then struggled to rise again. His eyes were growing dim. The sky was slowly beginning to darken. The sunset was approaching. In the distance, the sound of a train echoed. The vibrations of the tracks resonated through the ground. But in Rex's world, there was only one thing left. Jessica's scent, her voice, her smile. He kept walking. Meanwhile, Jessica was driving along the path Isaac had described. She pulled the car over to the side, then ran up a hill. From there, she scanned the landscape. "Rex, where are you?" But everything was silent. The only sound was the wind brushing against the leaves of the trees. Jessica closed her eyes, raised her nose to the air. She tried to feel the direction Rex had gone. She listened to the voice inside her head. "Your heart will find me." And her feet began to carry her down another path. Rex's steps were growing heavier. Each time his paws hit the ground, it felt as though his heart was aching. He stumbled over a bush, lost his balance, and his body slowly collapsed to the ground. He stayed there for a few seconds. Then he lifted his head. His vision had dimmed, but his ears were still searching for Jessica's voice. "Rex!" In that moment, Rex's ears twitched. With a weak breath, he turned his head. He saw the silhouette above. Jessica stood there, one hand pressed against a tree, the other clutching her heart. She had seen him. Rex struggled to rise, his paws scraping at the earth, but he collapsed again almost immediately. Breathing heavily, Jessica ran through the mud, her feet sinking into the rain-soaked ground. But she didn't stop. When she reached him, she cradled his head in both hands. At that moment, tears poured from her eyes like rivers. "You didn't leave me. You were still looking for me." Rex's tail flicked weakly against the ground. He fixed his gaze on Jessica's eyes. With that silent look, he conveyed a lifetime of loyalty. Though he couldn't speak, Jessica understood everything. Jessica took off her coat and wrapped it around Rex. She gently lifted his trembling body into her arms. For the first time, her heart wasn't healing in a hospital room. It was healing right there in that muddy forest. Because her love, her loyalty, her soul companion had found her. Just then, a voice called out from the distance. Isaac from inside a Jeep shouted, "Jessica!" Jessica raised her hand in the air. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but for the first time, her face carried a real smile. Rex slowly laid his head on Jessica's lap, and at that moment, a tear slipped from Jessica's eye. But this time, it was a tear of happiness. As Jessica held Rex's head on her lap, her fingers ran through his wet fur. Beneath his drenched coat, she could feel his frail body. Her heart trembled. She couldn't even begin to imagine how difficult the journey had been for him. "I know what you've been through. Every step, every weight, I felt it inside me." Rex slightly lifted his head. His eyes were still tired, but the gratitude in them, that familiar bond, crushed Jessica. Her tears flowed even faster, but this time, a smile accompanied them on her lips. "You never left me, Rex. You always protected me. You showed me the way. Now it's my turn. I will protect you now." Jessica tightened her coat around Rex's body. Isaac had reached them by now. When he saw them curled up together on the ground, he couldn't speak. Through his fogged-up glasses, he simply lowered his head, pulled a small umbrella from his coat pocket, and held it over them. Quietly, he knelt beside Jessica. "If he brought you this far," he whispered, "it's because he carries a great love inside him." Jessica lifted her head and smiled at Isaac. He's my family." Rex's eyelids were growing heavier, but he could still smell Jessica's scent, feel her touch. He was safe now. The smell of home, his owner's voice, the embrace under the rain, wrapped like a blanket over all the pain in the world. Jessica leaned down slightly and placed a kiss on Rex's forehead. "We're going home, buddy." And in that moment, everything fell silent. The rain eased, the wind stopped. Time flowed only in the beat of their hearts. Months had passed. The old cabin at the entrance of the town was no longer the same. Its garden was full of flowers, and there was always light in the windows. Jessica's eyes were no longer tired. They were filled with hope. Every morning, the first thing she did upon waking was to pet Rex's head and take long walks with him. She was no longer alone. In fact, she never had been. It had just taken her a little time to realize that. Rex, on the other hand, had healed. His once weakened body was now stronger, but most importantly, his heart was the same as ever. Loyal, loving, and ready to protect. Jessica's illness had been caught in time, and she went through a successful treatment process. The doctors described her survival as a miracle, but Jessica explained it with a different word: love. The townspeople had also been deeply moved by this story. The bond between Jessica and Rex became the talk of the town. In fact, Jessica had opened a small center to teach children in the town the importance of animal love. Rex was the mascot and inspiration for the center. He was a friend whose head was petted by every child, a friend who touched every heart. One day, Jessica said to the children at the center, "Sometimes, even in our darkest times, there is a light that will guide us. Sometimes that light shines in the eyes of a four-legged friend." At that moment, Rex glided through the door. All the children rushed to him, hugging him with excitement. He, as always, silently but proudly sat next to Jessica. In his eyes, there was only one thing. "I am here." Jessica smiled. She placed her hand on his head and whispered, "And you will always be here." Thanks for watching. If you liked our news story, please like, share, and tap the bell to hear new stories told every day.